if we accept the perhaps slightly crude generalization that some historians of religion make between forms of religion that are traditional and affective. This is a distinction that is associated, for instance, with Weber. Affective, or sometimes charismatic. That might be a clearer word. And Weber's idea is that religious movements begin as great charismatic, exciting moments when God or the sacred seems to be physically present amongst the community, and the focus of devotion is towards the transformed individual rather than towards a text. And as time goes by, the religion becomes more institutionalized in order to preserve the memory of that initial miraculous moment, and so it becomes a traditional form of religion. God becomes more transcendent, and the sacred is discovered through the exegesis of texts rather than through personal experience of a sainted individual.
Could you speak up a bit more, please?
Really?
People are having a hard time hearing.
Okay, I'm sorry. So this is actually a useful distinction to make in the Islamic context, although Weber basically is working with evidence from Christian history. And we can say that, to take, for instance, the most fundamental distinction between Islam and Christianity, we could say that Christianity, from the Muslim perspective, was so dazzled by the presence of God in Jesus Christ that it worshipped the messenger as well as the one who was supplying the message. As Ghazali says, the Christian error was that they were so dazzled by the light of the sun shining in the purified mirror that was the heart of Jesus that they ended up worshipping the mirror. And this is, from the point of view of mainstream Sunnism, a definition of why Islam can't accept the doctrine of incarnation. And there are historians who will suggest that this is because of the influence of Hellenistic ideas of theanthropic human beings who are both man and God at the same time, perhaps ideas that come in from further east, ultimately having their roots perhaps in Indian religion. It's all pretty speculative. Whereas Islam actually didn't go down that route. Islam stuck with, if you like, a pure Semitic, Abrahamic, transcendent God who communicates his will to human beings through books and through laws. And I mentioned briefly the traditional, I think, anti-Semitic stereotype that has Christianity as a religion of the spirit, and hence more appropriate, as 19th century historians generally saw, for the Aryan races, and Judaism and Islam as being rooted in the desert, where God is very distant and transcendent, and who expresses himself as a transcendent, unknowable God in text and in laws. And so all the believer can really do is mess around endlessly with minutiae of legal exegesis. Nowadays, of course, we know that that doesn't work at all, because we know too much about the flourishing of Jewish spirituality in the Hasidic movement and Islamic mysticism. So the idea of Christianity as being spiritual and Islam and Judaism as being legalistic really is not respectable any longer. But the fundamental distinction is significant, because Islam resists the tendencies that were present in some circles for the divinizing of the founder of the religion. Nonetheless, that tendency did, on occasion, break surface and represents the bulk of movements that we could really describe as heretical. And in some cases, these movements exist today. And this is the phenomenon that is known by the Quranic term as Ghulum, and is actually drawn from the Quranic term that criticizes the Christian deification of Jesus. Ya ahl al-kitabi la taghlu fi dinikum. O people of the book, do not go to excess in your religion. This word ghulu really means going beyond the limit, going to excess, specifically by divinizing a human being, and hence impossibly confusing the absolute and the relative. So, although in Christianity we find a developing understanding of Jesus as God, in Islam, where theoretically that might have happened, in practice it doesn't happen. And Islam sticks with the Abrahamic, Mosaic, Semitic, if you like, transcendent God, although one, as we'll see in the context of Sufism, also had a strongly immanent presence as well. Nonetheless, as Islam spreads through the Eastern Mediterranean and, unlike Christianity, spreads also further east, because Islam is the first civilization since Alexander the Great to unite the Mediterranean basin with the religiously very fertile, very different Iranian plateau. We find that Iranian ideas of the theanthropos, the human being who is also God, in the Iranian language, the man of light, who is often identified with the Shah or the head of the state, they start to creep into Islam through the huge numbers of converts. And we find factual evidence for Ali, for instance, the Prophet's son-in-law, banishing from his sight people who regarded him as a god and wanted to worship him. So Islam resists that tendency almost, but not quite. And we have around the fringes of Shiism these Ghulu groups who still exist to this day, and their most conspicuous presence is in Turkey, Central and Eastern Anatolia, where you have people called the Alavis. They are perhaps 20% of the total population of Turkey. And in their villages, they certainly don't have mosques, they don't really observe Ramadan, and they wouldn't be seen dead on Hajj. They see this as being sort of exoteric and unnecessary, and true religion comes about through worshipping Ali, who was for them God incarnate. So that has been the principal category of heresy, for which the term is either ghulu or sometimes, particularly if it has a Manichaean edge to it, zandaqa, which is not a Quranic word, probably has Iranian roots. But otherwise, and those people really are considered non-Muslims. And if they were too noisy, say the Ottoman state would be quite happy to put them to death. But movements such as Mu'tazilism and Shi'ism, which are much closer to Sunnism and do recognize the 5 pillars and certainly don't divinize the founders of the religion, they are regarded as being broadly within the broad circle of truth.